How does it feel? The words sliced through the dimly lit restaurant like a knife, and I froze mid-step, glass of sparkling water trembling slightly in my hand. The waiter had just placed the check on the table between us, and the words weren't meant to be polite small talk. They were venom, aimed straight at me, dripping with the kind of mockery that makes your chest tighten and your stomach twist. I looked up slowly, catching the glint of a smirk from a man I had nodded at earlier, someone my wife had introduced as a colleague from her new project team. He thought this was a private joke, a casual humiliation whispered across the table, while the rest of the office party laughed around them. But I didn't laugh. I smiled, coldly. My name's Ethan Parker. I'm 38, work in IT security in downtown Dallas, and I've been married to Lauren for just over 10 years. From the outside, our life looks like the picture-perfect American suburban story. 2 cars in the driveway, a golden retriever named Tucker who insists on stealing socks, weekends spent at Cookout on Greenville Avenue with burgers that taste exactly like nostalgia, and road trips up to Oklahoma's lakes when we needed an escape from city chaos. Our first apartment together was a tiny unit in Uptown, the kind with squeaky floors and neon bar signs across the street, and I remember her laughing when we tried to cook spaghetti and ended up burning the sauce while Tucker licked every pot we didn't use. I fell for Lauren the way most people fall into a melody they can't stop humming, slow, unrelenting, inevitable. We met in a photography class at Southern Methodist University. She had this way of looking at light and shadows, pointing out nuances in the way the sun hit a lamppost, or the reflection on a puddle after a summer rain. I was drawn to her, of course, but more than that, I wanted to be someone worthy of her attention. Our first date was classic Dallas cliché, tacos at Velvet Taco, followed by a stroll around Clyde Warren Park. We laughed at street performers, fed the ducks, and didn't stop talking until the park closed. By the time we shared our first kiss, I was convinced life had finally aligned itself in my favor. Marriage followed, as naturally as sunrise follows night. Our first apartment gave way to a townhome in Lakewood, then to the house on a quiet cul-de-sac near White Rock Lake, where every neighbor seemed to nod politely but not intrude. Lauren, with her sharp business mind and natural charm, worked her way up in a tech consultancy firm while I navigated the quieter, less glamorous world of IT audits and penetration testing. She thrived in boardrooms, presenting strategies with confidence, while I was content debugging lines of code late into the night, feeling satisfaction in smaller victories. We complemented each other, or so I thought. I should have noticed the subtle shifts first, the almost imperceptible cues that now flash in my memory like warning lights ignored too long. Lauren started taking more client dinners that weren't on her calendar before. Her phone, once left casually on the counter with notifications popping openly, now disappeared into her purse at the first sound of mine approaching. She laughed a little too quickly at certain texts, stepped out of the room to take calls more often, and on weekends she seemed almost eager to escape the house. I rationalized it at first. Deadlines, stress, friendships, a million excuses that kept me sleeping comfortably at night. I remember the night it all started to feel off. It was an unusually warm March evening. We had just returned from a weekend road trip to the Texas Hill Country, where we'd rented a small cabin near Fredericksburg. The stars were brilliant, the air scented with blooming bluebonnets and fresh rain. Lauren suggested a late-night walk along the gravel trail near the cabin. I noticed her silence first, the way she kept glancing at her phone and tucking it away when I looked. Her hand found mine, but it was fleeting, more out of habit than intimacy. I asked if everything was okay, and she smiled, but the kind of smile that doesn't quite reach the eyes. That night, for the first time, a seed of doubt planted itself in my chest, though I didn't yet understand the depth of it. Back in Dallas, life returned to its normal cadence, or at least I told myself it did. I threw myself into work, stayed late, traveled for audits, anything to avoid the gnawing feeling that had taken root. And then came the dinner, the infamous office dinner where the question was asked, not directly, not with overt accusation, but with an ease that only someone entirely confident in their knowledge of another's private life could possess. Lauren had been excited to attend, eager to network, and I had agreed to go along, hoping to appear supportive, a good husband in front of her colleagues. The restaurant was downtown, one of those dimly lit spots where the wine glasses sparkle against the candles, and waiters wear black ties that make them look like ghosts flitting between tables. The air smelled of roasted garlic and aged oak, the clink of cutlery mixing with laughter and quiet conversation. That's when he leaned over, whispered it in a tone meant for amusement, not for hearing by me. "How does it feel?" The words were casual, but the implication was anything but. He was mocking me. Mocking me for what? I didn't know yet. I didn't want to show the tremor in my hand or the heat rising in my ears. Instead, I held that cold smile, a mask that hid everything, and took a sip of my sparkling water. Lauren laughed lightly at something across the table, completely oblivious, or perhaps willfully blind. My mind, however, began racing. Something was happening, something I hadn't seen coming, and that smirk told me everything. Later that night, after the dinner, when we were driving back through the neon-splashed streets of downtown Dallas, I found myself staring at the streetlights reflecting off the windshield, counting the intervals between each flicker. My thoughts twisted over the question he had asked. How does it feel? I couldn't shake the feeling that there was a story behind those words, one I wasn't part of yet but would soon be forced into. Lauren hummed along to the radio, tapping her fingers on the steering wheel, completely unaware of the storm gathering silently in the passenger seat. I wanted to ask her, confront her, but I restrained myself. Patience, observation, gathering evidence. Something deep inside me knew I needed more than instinct this time. I needed proof. The nights that followed were sleepless. I replayed every interaction I could remember, searching for the subtle signs I had ignored. There was the time she returned from a work event a little later than expected, eyes flickering toward the couch where her phone had been charging, thumbs scrolling in hidden motions. There was the email from a colleague on a Sunday morning that mentioned her by name, one she had claimed she hadn't seen. Every detail, every inconsistency, piled on top of the unease I was already feeling. Tucker, our golden retriever, seemed to sense it too. He refused to sleep in the master bedroom and instead stayed wedged between the bed and the dresser, eyes tracking our movements with a caution I hadn't noticed before. I started small, checking receipts, confirming dates, noting inconsistencies. Lauren was meticulous, careful, but so was I. The trust that had once been the cornerstone of our relationship was cracking, fissures appearing where laughter and late-night talks used to reside. I didn't want to believe what I feared, but the instinct was relentless. Something was wrong. And if there was one thing I knew about myself, it was that I couldn't ignore a truth once it whispered loud enough in the back of my mind. And now, as I stood there, the memory of that question hanging in the air between clinking glasses and quiet office chatter, I knew with chilling certainty that the next few weeks would change everything. The life I thought I had, comfortable, secure, picture-perfect, was about to unravel, thread by thread. I would have to navigate suspicion, gather evidence, confront betrayal, and survive the public fallout. And somewhere in the back of my mind, beneath the cold calculations and quiet observations, a part of me braced for the possibility that the person I had trusted most, the one who had promised forever, might be the very architect of my pain. The city lights reflected off the windows as I drove home that night, Lauren beside me chatting casually about the weekend plans. I nodded absently, listening but not hearing, watching the asphalt blur beneath us, thinking about the words that would haunt me. How does it feel? And I realized then, with a clarity that sent a shiver down my spine, that this wasn't just a casual office joke. It was a warning, and whatever came next, I would be ready. The days after the office dinner blurred together in a haze of quiet observation and mounting unease. I kept my interactions with Lauren casual, even warm at times, masking the storm that had settled behind my eyes. At the office, I buried myself in firewalls and intrusion detection protocols, yet my mind never strayed far from the subtle cues I had begun to catalog. The way her phone vibrated in her purse just a little too frequently, the half smile that seemed rehearsed, the sudden defensiveness whenever I asked where she'd been. I began noticing details I'd previously overlooked. Her keys left on the counter were no longer in the same pattern each night. Mail came and went, some of it unopened, or so it appeared. And there was that faint, elusive scent, a mix of expensive perfume and something floral that wasn't hers, lingering on her jacket after she returned from late-night meetings. It started innocuously, almost laughably. I told myself I was overreacting, but then came the first real anomaly. One Saturday morning, I found a receipt tucked behind the drawer in the kitchen, a valet ticket from a hotel downtown, time-stamped at 11:47 p.m. on a Wednesday. Lauren had told me she'd been at a networking event across town, but the hotel address wasn't the same as the office venue. My stomach sank. I slid the ticket into my pocket, pretending I hadn't seen it when she came in a few minutes later, humming a tune from a Spotify playlist I didn't recognize. I began my own quiet investigation. I'm not a private investigator by trade, but I know how to follow digital trails. Her iMessages were synced across devices at home, though she didn't realize the MacBook she used for work occasionally mirrored her phone notifications. I watched discreetly, noting how certain conversations would disappear from her phone after a brief interval, but not before I caught snippets. "Can't wait to see you. Did you get it?" And one that chilled me to the bone. "He suspects nothing. Perfect." The nameless sender didn't identify themselves, but the context made it clear. These weren't friendly colleagues congratulating each other on project milestones. One evening, under the pretense of picking up a pizza for Tucker and me, I scanned the car. Lauren had left her purse on the back seat. Inside, I found another anomaly, a credit card statement with charges I didn't recognize, room service at a boutique hotel, a late-night taxi fare, and a recurring monthly charge from a streaming service I'd never seen her use. The pattern was obvious now. It wasn't one isolated incident. There was a deliberate effort to hide it. Every work dinner, networking event, and late project was meticulously timed and orchestrated. I started taking notes, cataloging everything in a leather-bound journal I kept on the top shelf of the closet. Dates, times, receipts, even the faint smell of her perfume on certain items. I photographed the receipts, screenshotted the messages when I could, and filed every digital and physical clue I uncovered. Tucker seemed to sense the tension, following me from room to room, his head tilted in that way he does when he's unsure of what's happening. At first, I thought I was paranoid. By midweek, I realized the evidence was undeniable. Something was happening behind my back, and the person orchestrating it was none other than the woman I had trusted with my life. The breakthrough came one rainy Thursday night. Lauren had claimed she was attending a late client dinner downtown, insisting I stay home and finish some urgent work. I complied, though my heart had ached the entire drive to the office. I had started to suspect that these events weren't just social. There was an intimacy that had nothing to do with business. I waited until she left, then quietly slipped into her email account from the laptop she had left open. Nothing overt, just the kind of subtle correspondence someone might overlook. Hotel confirmations, Uber receipts with pickup times that matched her claimed whereabouts, and more messages that hinted at clandestine meetings. I printed the emails, double-checking timestamps, cross-referencing them with the receipts I'd already collected. The patterns aligned perfectly, almost too perfectly, like a puzzle meant to taunt me. But it wasn't just the logistics. There were moments that hit me harder than any digital proof could. A photograph I stumbled across on her iCloud backup showed her at a cafe with a man whose face I couldn't see, cropped just enough to preserve anonymity, yet the posture, the casual touch of hands on the table, the intimate way she leaned in, told me everything I needed to know. My hands trembled as I copied it to a secure folder on my laptop. Every night afterward, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, piecing together the timeline, each bit of evidence nudging me closer to a horrifying truth. I didn't confront her yet. I knew confrontation without certainty was a mistake. I needed irrefutable proof. So, I escalated my investigation. One evening, I mailed an anonymous note to myself from a public mailbox containing the details I had compiled so far, receipts, screenshots, and the photograph. My rationale: if Lauren confronted me, I could produce the evidence, but if I was wrong, no one else would ever see it. Paranoia mingled with strategy. I felt like a general planning a siege, except the battlefield was my own home, and the enemy was someone I had once loved. Then came the most damning discovery. Lauren had begun slipping her phone into the glove compartment of her car instead of her purse. Out of habit, I checked her car one evening under the pretense of grabbing groceries from the trunk. There it was. A small, unassuming envelope with a manila finish. Inside were several hotel keycards, a crumpled receipt from a high-end boutique restaurant, and a note in her handwriting that said, "Don't forget Tuesday, he's expecting me." I took a deep breath, the rain tapping against the windshield like a relentless drum, and realized the reality of what I had been suspecting. The casual cruelty of that office colleague's words, "How does it feel?" was no longer a tease or a joke. It was a confirmation I hadn't wanted, but had feared all along. The next week, I followed a cautious routine. I documented every instance of her absence, every vague explanation, every hurried glance at a text that she quickly deleted. I even checked GPS logs on her car when she was out, mapping out the exact locations she claimed to be against the evidence I was collecting. The consistency of deception was astonishing. I found myself staring at maps on my laptop late into the night, tracing routes from her supposed networking dinners to hotel addresses downtown. The roads lit up like veins carrying secrets I had been blind to for months. Then, one night, the ultimate confirmation landed in my lap. I had mailed myself a DNA testing kit anonymously. A precaution, a final step to determine what I had long suspected but could not yet fully articulate. It was in a plain box, shipped to my office under a false name, the instructions meticulous and scientific. My plan was simple: discreetly collect the sample when the opportunity presented itself. It wasn't a matter of if at this point, only when. It was during a rare late-night home alone moment that the opportunity arose. Lauren had stepped out for a quick errand, claiming she needed to pick up supplies for the next week. I waited in the bedroom, heart hammering, gripping the small vial and swab like they were weapons in a war I had been silently waging. The air smelled faintly of her perfume, the scent mingling with the adrenaline coursing through my veins. I collected what I needed, sealed the vial, and prepared the kit for submission. My hands didn't shake anymore. I was beyond fear. I was in the domain of calculation and inevitability. As I dropped the kit off at the courier the next morning, rain soaking my jacket and the city humming indifferently around me, I felt a strange calm. Evidence had transformed suspicion into fact. Every receipt, every message, every subtle gesture that had kept me awake for months had led to this moment. The uncertainty that had haunted me now had a tangible endpoint. And yet, there was a new tension building, a quiet dread. What would happen when the truth came back? How would Lauren respond when confronted with irrefutable proof? And most importantly, how would I reveal it without losing the composure I had fought so hard to maintain? I returned home, rain dripping from my hair, sliding the car into the garage. Tucker barked once, his tail wagging cautiously, as if he sensed the change in the air. Lauren arrived an hour later, smiling, oblivious to the fact that her carefully constructed facade had begun to crumble under the weight of meticulously gathered evidence. She greeted me with a kiss, the casual warmth that used to bring comfort now tinged with irony in my mind. I smiled back, calm, composed, but the gears were turning. The next step had been set in motion. The proof was in motion, and soon the mask would slip. I stood in the kitchen, staring at the rain-smeared window, the city lights blurred by water. Every piece of evidence, every subtle lie, every smirk and evasive glance was a thread that I had woven together into a net I would not let slip. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown. The following Thursday, the office had organized another client dinner, this time at one of the swankier steakhouses downtown. I knew Lauren would attend. It was practically unavoidable, and I knew the timing perfectly coincided with the window I had been waiting for. But this evening, I wasn't going to stay in the shadows. I had the DNA results back that afternoon, and the report sat on my desk. Bold letters confirming exactly what I had feared. Lauren's secret wasn't just infidelity. It had penetrated the deepest layers of trust, rewriting our shared history. I arrived early, parking a few blocks away so that no one would suspect my presence. My blazer was crisp, the tie knot perfect, and my face carefully neutral. I carried a slim envelope in my jacket pocket, containing a copy of the DNA results and all the corroborating evidence I had collected over the past 2 months. Inside, the receipts, screenshots, and hotel key cards were organized with precision, each item a nail in the coffin of the illusion Lauren had maintained so effortlessly. The restaurant's glass doors reflected my own expression back at me as I entered, walking past the host's stand without hesitation. Inside, the ambiance was hushed elegance. Warm golden lighting, low murmurs of conversation, the clink of silverware against plates, and the faint scent of prime rib and truffle butter. I spotted her immediately, seated at a large round table in the center, her colleagues chatting animatedly around her. Lauren looked radiant in a navy sheath dress, her hair pulled back in a loose chignon, laughter spilling easily from her lips. My stomach twisted, but I felt nothing but a cold clarity. I approached the table slowly, drawing the attention of a few colleagues who hadn't yet noticed me. Lauren's eyes widened the instant she saw me, a flash of recognition quickly replaced by forced composure. I placed my hand on the back of the empty chair bestir, sitting without invitation. Conversation stalled, forks hovered mid-air, and the murmur of voices dropped to whispers. I leaned slightly forward, maintaining a neutral tone. "Good evening, everyone," I said, my voice calm, measured, yet carrying an unmistakable edge. "I believe we need to discuss something Important. Lauren's lips parted, her hand flying to her mouth. James, what, what are you doing here? She whispered, eyes darting around, searching for an escape route. I think you know why I'm here, I replied, placing the envelope on the table. The leather creaked softly as it slid across the polished wood. I've gathered everything. Every message, every receipt, every late-night networking event that wasn't quite what you told me it was. And now we have confirmation. A waiter hovering nearby cleared his throat nervously, pretending not to eavesdrop, yet clearly drawn into the tension. The entire table fell silent. Even the couple at the next table were staring now, curiosity overriding manners. Lauren's hands shook slightly as she reached for the envelope. James, please, this is public. People are watching. Exactly, I interrupted, voice sharp but controlled. People are watching. You thought you could keep it hidden, thought I wouldn't notice, thought the little smirks, the stolen glances, the lies would go unnoticed. But they didn't. And now, I opened the envelope, flipping through the evidence with deliberate care. Here's the proof. She glanced at the documents, her face paling. A colleague seated next to her leaned in curiously, and before I could stop it, a voice cut through the tense air. How does it feel? Said Mark, a male colleague from her department, chuckling softly, leaning back in his chair. It was the same words from that fateful office dinner 2 months ago. The room went still, all eyes flicking between Lauren, Mark, and me. I smiled coldly, the calm before the storm. It feels inevitable, I replied, my gaze locking onto Lauren. You wanted to test the limits of trust. You wanted to see how far your lies could go before someone noticed. Now we all know. Lauren's mouth opened, but no words came. Her hands trembled as she attempted to grab the papers from my hand. I held them just out of reach, deliberate, giving her no dignity. A few people at the table gasped audibly. Phones began emerging from pockets, cameras clicking surreptitiously. The moment had escalated beyond private confrontation. It had become a spectacle. You've been with him? I asked quietly, though everyone could hear, forcing her to acknowledge the truth without permission. Her voice was shaky. It's not like that, James. We, I repeated, leaning back, exuding a calm that was unnerving. Yes, we. This is what months of deception look like. And while you laughed behind my back, manipulated everyone around us, the rest of us, we were blind. The waiter, now visibly uncomfortable, paused mid-step. One of her female colleagues whispered to another, incredulous. I noticed the subtle shifts in body language, the defensive arms, the slight avoidance of eye contact. The facade had cracked, and the audience, though uninvited, was witnessing the fallout in real time. Lauren's voice rose. James, stop this. You're humiliating me. And you think what you did wasn't humiliating? I countered, voice low, almost soothing, yet icy. Do you have any idea what it feels like to uncover months of betrayal? To realize that someone you loved and trusted has been living a lie right under your roof? Her hands flew to her face, and I could see tears threatening to spill. Mark, sensing the gravity, tried to intervene. Hey, come on, man. Maybe this isn't the place. I didn't let him finish. No, this is the place, Tastimo, I said, louder now, ensuring every voice in the room heard. We're all adults here, adults who know when someone's being deceitful. And now, everyone knows. The lies are out in the open, and no one can ignore them. A few more phones emerged. One colleague whispered, "Should we call security?" Another laughed nervously. The room's energy oscillated between shock, judgment, and voyeuristic curiosity. Lauren, now panicked, tried to snatch the papers, but I pushed them slightly back, a subtle physical assertion of control. Do you want me to read them aloud? I asked, voice cold. The messages, the receipts, the hotel nights? Or would you rather everyone scroll through your secrets on their phones first? Her lips trembled, and she shook her head. Please, no. I will, I replied softly, almost tenderly, a contrast that made the entire scene even more excruciating. Because what you did deserves to be seen. Not just by me, but by everyone you allowed to believe in you, everyone you deceived. This isn't about revenge. This is about truth. Then came the sound that made my stomach lurch, a fork clattering to the floor from the next table, a gasp from a nearby couple. Phones were raised, recording, capturing every subtle flicker of fear and realization. Lauren's colleagues leaned in, whispers sharp and invasive, voices thick with judgment. I finally let her take the envelope, flipping through the pages and pictures. Her face, once so composed, now mirrored shame, confusion, and regret all at once. She looked around, seeking someone to save her, anyone to blame. There was no escape. The walls of her carefully constructed world had crumbled, and the audience, unplanned but omnipresent, witnessed it all. Mark, still leaning back with a smug grin, spoke up again, this time quieter, almost admiringly. "Well, I guess that answers my question from the other night." His words cut through the remaining tension, a reminder that the seeds of humiliation had already sprouted. Lauren's voice wobbled, barely audible. "James, please." I shook my head slowly. "No, I think you need to sit with this, to understand the full weight of your actions, and so do the people around you." And just as the tension peaked, the sharp crack of a wine glass hitting the floor echoed through the room. A waiter had dropped one mid-fumble, startled by the confrontation. The sound seemed symbolic, a punctuation mark on the chaos, drawing every eye toward us. Lauren's gasp, combined with the murmurs, the soft click of cameras, the visible judgment on every face, it all converged into a moment of perfect, brutal clarity. I looked at her one last time before standing, calm, composed, and utterly resolute. "This is over, Lauren. Not just for me, but for everyone who thought they knew you." The room remained frozen, the buzz of whispers mixing with the soft clinking of remaining silverware. Lauren slumped into her chair, mortified, utterly exposed, and as I walked toward the exit, phone cameras tracking my every step, I realized that while the confrontation had been public, the final reveal, the ripple effect, was only just beginning. The evidence, the humiliation, the truth, it had a life of its own now, spreading beyond the walls of the restaurant, beyond my control. As the door closed behind me, the rain outside pouring in sheets, I felt a strange sense of liberation. The burden of suspicion was gone. The burden of deceit had been laid bare. But even as I exhaled, I knew the final act hadn't yet played out, because exposing betrayal was only the beginning. What came next, the aftermath, the consequences, would test me in ways I hadn't yet imagined. And somewhere in the shadows of the city, a new revelation waited. One more secret I had yet to uncover, one more truth that could shatter everything all over again. The morning after the confrontation, the city felt unusually quiet. Even the usual hum of traffic seemed muted, as if the world itself had paused to catch its breath. I had barely slept, tossing and turning in the guest room I'd claimed for the night at my brother's apartment downtown, the rain tapping insistently against the window. Every flash of last night's scene, the envelope sliding across the table, Lauren's frozen expression, Mark's smug smirk, the gasps of her colleagues, played over and over in my mind. I hadn't cried, I hadn't shouted, I had maintained control, but exhaustion was settling in, heavier than I'd anticipated. By mid-morning, I returned to the apartment we had once shared in the suburbs. It was eerily quiet, almost too clean. Lauren hadn't come home. I hadn't expected her to. The lease, the furniture, the little reminders of a life that had once felt stable, all stood like a museum of memories I no longer belonged to. I paused at the doorway, inhaling the scent of our old home, a mix of vanilla candles and the faint lingering aroma of coffee. And then, almost reflexively, I began the process of reclaiming it, not for her, not for anyone, but for myself. I packed up the photos first. Vacations to the Smoky Mountains, road trips along Route 6, tailgating at Cowboys Stadium. I placed the images carefully into a box, each one a bittersweet reminder of what had been and what could no longer be. The framed picture of us in front of that neon-lit diner, the one where we'd had pancakes at 2 a.m., I left aside, the glass intact, but the image of happiness now hollowed out by betrayal. By afternoon, I had begun making calls to lawyers. It was clinical, procedural, but necessary. I scheduled a consultation to discuss divorce proceedings, asset division, and custody arrangements. The DNA report and accompanying evidence were already copied and secured. I didn't want revenge, but I wanted accountability. The attorney reassured me that the case would be straightforward, given the documentation, but I knew legal clarity didn't equate to emotional clarity. When the paperwork was done, I finally allowed myself a small reprieve, a walk down the quiet streets of our neighborhood. The leaves were beginning to turn, crisp autumn colors streaking the sidewalks. I passed the little diner where Lauren and I had first met, where we had shared countless Sunday breakfasts, laughing over hash browns and overcooked bacon. I stopped outside the window, watching patrons inside, their faces oblivious to the drama that had unraveled in my life. I thought of her, sitting somewhere, perhaps realizing for the first time that the world wouldn't bend around her mistakes. Back home, I made a simple lunch: grilled cheese and tomato soup, nothing fancy, but enough to ground me. I sat at the kitchen table, eating slowly, the silence of the apartment almost comforting now. I realized, as I sipped my soup, that I had spent months consumed by doubt, suspicion, and planning. But this simple act of nourishment, something so mundane, was a small reclaiming of normalcy, a tiny anchor in a storm. The following days were a blur of meetings, calls, and, most importantly, reflection. I allowed myself to feel the anger, to acknowledge the hurt, but I refused to let it define me. I spent evenings walking through the park, listening to the wind rustle through oak trees, feeling the crunch of leaves beneath my shoes, letting the rhythm soothe the jagged edges of my emotions. I realized that revenge, the visceral satisfaction of seeing her humiliated, was fleeting. Peace was a slow, deliberate process, cultivated through acts of self-care, reflection, and small routines. I started reconnecting with friends I had neglected, people who had seen me through college football games, late-night cookouts, and road trips to Austin. Their presence reminded me that life extended beyond the walls of betrayal. On Saturday mornings, we grilled in the backyard, laughter spilling over the fence lines, children running in zigzag paths across freshly mown grass. I found myself genuinely enjoying the moments again, feeling the warmth of sunlight and camaraderie without the constant shadow of suspicion. One particularly quiet evening, I sat on the back porch with a cold Bud Light in hand, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The sky was painted in streaks of orange and violet, and I noticed for the first time in months how much the world could still surprise me with its simple beauty. My son's crayon drawings, left on the fridge, brought a smile, a reminder that innocence endured, even when trust had been broken. I realized I had been holding on too tightly to anger, forgetting that life's small pleasures could heal wounds in ways confrontation never could. Lauren attempted to contact me occasionally via text and email, but I maintained a firm boundary. I responded once, succinctly, "I am moving on. Please respect that." Each message thereafter I ignored. It wasn't cruelty, it was preservation. Allowing her back into my emotional orbit would undo the painstaking work of recovery. The knowledge that I had set clear limits, that I wasn't allowing chaos to infiltrate my life, brought an unexpected sense of empowerment. Legal proceedings moved quickly. We finalized the divorce with assets divided equitably and custody arrangements agreed upon. The courtroom, once a place I imagined filled with tension and spectacle, became instead a space of formality. I watched Lauren walk out, her expression unreadable, and I felt nothing but calm. The weight of betrayal had been acknowledged and documented, but it no longer weighed on me personally. Justice, in its procedural form, had been served, but so had my emotional boundaries. Evenings now were spent in quiet reflection rather than plotting. I revisited old routines, early morning jogs along the lakefront, dinner at the diner with friends, reading by the fireplace. I allowed myself to indulge in the small absurdities of life. A particularly funny commercial on ESPN, a neighbor's overly aggressive dog chase, the ridiculous arguments over college football rivalries. These trivialities, once background noise to a life overshadowed by deception, became comforting. They reminded me that the world was still vibrant, still moving, and I could move with it rather than against it. Months later, I found myself sitting on the porch again, Bud Light in hand, watching a particularly breathtaking sunset. My thoughts drifted briefly to the chaos, the humiliation, the confrontation, but instead of anger, I felt clarity. Life had a rhythm, a sequence of losses and recoveries, betrayals and forgiveness, though not necessarily of others, sometimes simply forgiveness of circumstance. I allowed a small smile to cross my lips, realizing that my emotional equilibrium was my ultimate triumph. I didn't need vindication, the satisfaction of public spectacle, or the fleeting pleasure of schadenfreude. I needed freedom. And in that freedom, I found something more valuable: perspective. Betrayal had changed the course of my life, yes, but it had also forced me to confront who I was, what I valued, and what I could endure without losing myself. Sometimes, in the quiet moments, I still thought of Lauren. I didn't hate her. Hatred was a corrosive weight I had no intention of carrying. Instead, I reflected on lessons learned, the importance of boundaries, the necessity of transparency, and the quiet power of resilience. Life, in its chaotic brilliance, continued, and I was determined to continue with it, rather than against it. As I watched my son finish a drawing and proudly hang it on the fridge, I realized the final truth. Happiness wasn't revenge. It wasn't punishment. It was ordinary, mundane, beautiful freedom. I had rebuilt the foundation of my life on my own terms. One pancake breakfast, one afternoon walk, one Bud Light at sunset at a time. And for the first time in months, I felt that the world was mine to inhabit, untainted by deception, full of possibility. Sometimes the trash takes itself out, and sometimes the best revenge is simply living well.